And good afternoon. It is 3:32 p.m. here on Thursday, December 10th. My sidekick joining me here for What's Up Noob Author Series. You even have books behind you today, Mr. Frank Prosnitz.
Isn't that exciting? It looks like I actually read.
It does look like you read. And Frank, we're continuing our author series here today, and it's been a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, it has been. And, again, underscoring how many talented people we have in Rhode Island. Lots of different kinds of authors, of books. Backgrounds are different, and just a lot of fun. Today, it's Paul Caranci. Paul spent nearly 17 years on the North Providence Town Council. I think another 8 or so as the Deputy Secretary of State, and then decided to turn on all of those politicians and write a bunch of nonfiction books. A lot of it about political corruption, but one that really strikes me, and we'll talk about it, and it's always interested me, is called "The Hanging and Redemption of John Gordon: The Story of Rhode Island's Last Execution." And I'm really curious to learn more about that. How are you, Paul?
I'm doing terrific. How about you, Frank?
I'm doing well.
Hi, Ryan.
Hello.
So you ended up at the North Providence Town Council, I think long after I had left the Greenville office of the Journal and managing that office and covering the town of North Providence. And it was not a town without its controversy.
That's for sure. When I got on the council, I think Rick Dujardin and Debbie Horn were on the beat.
Well, they were. I actually worked with both of them in that office as well.
Okay.
So I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure of all the timing of all of this, but certainly a fascinating place to work, and with the infamous Sal Mancini mayor there for quite some time. Not without its controversy and of its interest. Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you into writing? When did that all happen? Was it still while you were in government, or was it after you had left?
Well, it was. I was still in government when I started to write. It was 2012. I think I published my first book. But to back up a bit, I'm a product of North Providence school systems, and I am a graduate of Providence College. I have taken some master's courses in MPA at Roger Williams. And it was during that time that I developed my love for writing. And it started out quite accidentally, actually. I never intended to write books. I love history, and I was trying to put together a little walking tour of all of the historical sites in North Providence. And I did that, and I found out that there were so many fascinating sites. And North Providence has such a varied history that most people don't realize, including me, and I'm a third-generation resident of Centerdale, so we don't move around much. But I didn't realize the fascinating history. For example, the very first powder mill in the Revolutionary War was built here in North Providence at the just over what is now the Johnston line, where the Burger King sits. That was a powder mill. We had the Industrial Revolution started here in North Providence. Most people give Pawtucket the credit, but at the time, Pawtucket was a village in the town of North Providence. It wasn't until almost 80 years later that land was ceded over to what became the town of Pawtucket and then the city. North Providence went all the way to the banks of the Blackstone River. So I was fascinated by that, and I thought, wow, I'm a third-generation resident. I didn't know that. I had history in high school. They didn't teach that. So I thought, wouldn't it be a great idea if we could teach some local history? So I researched a little bit about the history curriculum in the state and found that Rhode Island requires that 1 week out of the year of any history class taught in high school be dedicated to Rhode Island history. So I thought, yeah, it'd be nice if we could dedicate 1 day of that week to local history. It was Tip O'Neill that said all politics is local. Well, all history is local too. We look at figures like George Washington and, all of the historical figures we have in this country. They all lived someplace. They lived in a town or a city, and they influenced that place first So that's how their history started. And we had the same thing here in town. We had a Revolutionary War hero in North Providence, Captain Stephen Only, who actually saved the life of James Monroe on the battlefield. And if not for that, maybe, clearly Monroe would never have been president. And all of the things he accomplished during his presidency may have never been. So in any case, I approached the school department, the superintendent of schools, and asked if they might be interested in teaching some local history in their curriculum. And they said, sure, we'd love to do that, but we have no book to teach from. We don't have a teacher's guide. So we really couldn't do it. So I said, well, if I put together a book for you, would you teach it? And they said, absolutely. Well, at the time I had, like I said, put together that little walking tour. And it was just a pamphlet. Looks like this. It was a pamphlet of, it's got some color pictures, and it was just a tour of all the different sites in North Providence and the history behind them. So I figured, well, it'd be easy to turn that little pamphlet into a book. I added, I think, 12 or 15 biographies of local heroes, and I put it together with this walking tour, and I approached some copy houses to see what they would charge to bind it as a book. And to my surprise, I found out that the cheapest price was $12 a copy. Well, I had promised the school department that I would give them 100 copies, and I didn't have that kind of money in my pocket. So I started to panic. And by coincidence, that was a Friday that I got the last price. On that Sunday, I got an email, unsolicited email from the History Press saying, we write local history books. If you know anybody that, we publish them. If you know anyone that writes them, let us know. So I filled out the questionnaire about my concept of a biography, walking tour, history, and I passed it along. That Monday, they called me up and said, that's a real unique idea. We love it. Would you write the book? So I did. It ended up with this book, History of North Providence. And I put together a little teacher's guide that goes with it. And it actually ended up selling pretty well through the History Press. So I don't think it was because my book was phenomenal. I think it was just because the approach was interesting and because History Press sells a lot of books. So it sold well enough that they asked me to write a second book. And I pitched a whole lot of topics to them. And they said no very quickly to every one of the topics. Until one day, I was riding home from a meeting in Warwick that had gotten canceled. It was a cold, rainy, miserable day in February. And I decided to avoid the highway because I thought it would be flooded. And I drove through the side streets and came back and ended up going by Park Avenue in Cranston, where the Park Cinema is. On the marquee of the Park Cinema was the murder trial of John Gordon. Now, I had no idea who John Gordon was. I'm Italian. I'm not Irish. So that wasn't a story that was particularly popular in my circle. Sacco Vanzetti, that was a different story. That was popular, but not John Gordon. So I thought, hey, it's a cold, miserable night. I'm here. I have nothing to do because my meeting was canceled. Let me go in. So I went in and I watched this play that was written by Ken Dooley. And it was absolutely fascinating to me. The things that went on in John Gordon's life and the atrocities that were perpetrated against him by the government just astounded me. So I thought when I left there, I said, there's no way that this could have really happened. It had to be that the playwright was embellishing just to make the story more interesting. So I did my own research on it for a few days and found out that not only was everything in that play correct, factually, historically, but it was also the tip of the iceberg. It only touched a small piece of the entire story. So I wrote to the History Press and asked them if they had heard of that and if they would like me to do a book on that story. They jumped at that. They said that they had heard about it and they've been wanting a book for a long time In fact, they wanted Dr. Pat Connolly, to do it, but I guess he just never had an interest in writing the book on it. So I did. I agreed to write it, and that's The Hanging and Redemption of John Gordon, the book you mentioned, and it just tells the entire story of this immigrant family that came here in the mid 1800s, only to be totally destroyed in every aspect of their life, financially, emotionally, physically, destroyed, the entire family. And it was very moving. So that was my second book. And that's when I decided that I enjoyed writing. So at the beginning, it was just, I call myself the accidental author. I never intended to be one. But by the second book, I was hooked. And I started to write 1 or 2 books a year, every year after that.
And now you're up to a dozen.
I have 12 now, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul, we're going to talk about
Yeah.
a lot of your books today, and just wondering for reference, so we get it out of the way, best place for people to go to find out more about your books.
Well, Stillwater Books in Pawtucket has all of my books. And Books on the Square in Providence has almost all of my books. There are a lot of other bookstores in Rhode Island, including Barnes & Noble, that have some of my books, but not all of them. And they're all on Amazon.com as well.
And how about your website?
My website is www.paulcaranci.com, and all my books are there. If you buy them, if you want a signed book, you'd have to buy it on my website.
They could buy it. They could buy it in the store. I could sign it for them.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be
You
a
could do
signed
that.
book, yeah.
Sure. I'll send you my signature so you know what it looks like.
There you go. I'm assuming, we often talk, and Ryan really pushes the local bookstores. If I walk into a bookstore and I want to get a Paul Caranci book, but they don't have it, they can order it for me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Virtually
They can
any
all
bookstore.
order them. Yes.
So if you go online and you take a look and there's something that really interests you, walk into your local bookstore, and if they don't have it, ask them to get it for you, and they will.
Yes. And it generally comes within 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so that's great. So are you doing this now? Is this it? Are you full-time author?
For the most part, about 80% of my time is spent on writing and researching. And the other 20%, a little more at election time, is spent consulting for a company in Seattle, Washington, that sells election equipment for people who have disabilities.
You spent almost 30 years in Rhode Island government. Is that the motivation for a lot of what you've written?
Yeah, kind of. I probably would never have written about politics if it wasn't for my bad experience in government. And that, I guess that's what prompted those books on corruption, political corruption.
I'll elaborate a little bit, because you can't just leave us hanging. It's like a suspense novel, right? You're leaving me on the edge of a cliff. What were those experiences, and what did you hope that your books would accomplish?
Okay. So let me back up. I was on the town council for about 17 years. And over the course of that time, I started to suspect that some of my colleagues were accepting bribes or demanding bribes, extortion, if you will. But I had no proof. It was just a gut feeling based on their reactions to certain events, certain proposals that came before the council. For example, they may have been dead set against the proposal when it came to us. But over the course of a month or 2 months, they started to favor the proposal. And it was obvious to me that something had happened that caused them to change their opinion. And it wasn't because the proposal had changed. So it had to be something behind the scenes. It happened several times, and I chalked it up to coincidence initially. But then I started to see a pattern develop in their behavior, where they would try to rush something through without discussion, where they would try to convince the other councilmen that the community favored it, even though they were too afraid to come out and say they favored it. So after a while, I really started to get suspicious, And then I started to hear things from developers. So
When you say hear things from developers, were they offering you bribes?
no.
Okay.
It was things like we dropped our proposal because it's too expensive to do business in town. And why is it expensive? It's no more expensive than any other city or town. I mean, maybe our taxes might have been a little bit higher, but that's everything else is the same. The fees for development are the same. The process for getting a zone change or a variance is the same in every community. So there was really no difference to speak of. So when I started to hear that the cost of doing business is too high there, I started to wonder what that was all about. And then when you put two and two together with my other suspicions, it was pretty clear to me what was going on. I just had no proof of it. So, but I would talk to the councilman individually and say, this project isn't good for the town. It's going to increase traffic flow on Middle Spring Avenue, which is already a pretty bad street to travel on. It's maybe located next to a school, so it's not something you want near children. There's a lot of reasons why it wasn't good, but they kept pushing for it anyway. So, they would just tell me that, I was out of step. I was crazy. I was imagining things. I'm new to the council, so I didn't know how things were done, and I would learn eventually and that kind of thing. So I let it go for years, and I just, kind of built up a frustration within myself, but I didn't say anything because I had no proof.
Paul,
And
let me
then,
let me ask quickly: were these approaches made to specific council people, or was it across the entire council? It sounds to me like there were a couple of targets or people had put themselves out there as being amenable to these kinds of things, and therefore some of these people would gravitate to them. And there were other councilors who were there who, in fact, were not approached because maybe developers felt they were not approachable.
Yeah, you're exactly right on that. And my initial approach was to discuss it on the council bench and just raise questions. You were opposed to this last meeting. What changed that now makes you favor it? And I wouldn't get answers. In fact, I would get shut down. You're out of order or whatever. So I would talk to them individually, and it was a couple of councilmen in particular. The council president, who I was friendly with, and he always listened to me. He always gave me the courtesy of listening. So I would approach him more frequently because he listened. And then there was another councilman who I had a fairly good relationship with, and he was involved as well. And I would talk to him. And for the most part, they'd listen, but then they'd laugh and just say, yeah, you're imagining things. No, everything's fine. Nothing's going on. This is a good project because, and they would give me 5 or 6 reasons that made no sense to me. But they would all pass, and they would generally pass 5-2 or 6-1, with me being the one. I would still vote against it despite their trying to convince me that it was good. But then there was one project in particular. It was the Stop and Shop proposal that was located across the street from the high school where the new police and fire complex is now, right on Middle Spring Avenue. And that project was different because the council president called me up and he said, the developer would like to meet with you. Okay. I mean, I always gave developers the courtesy of meeting with them because that was my job. Listen to what they had to offer, evaluate it, decide if it was good for the town, and then cast a vote one way or the other. I would also listen to residents that wanted to talk to me about a project. But developers very rarely want to meet with the council people beforehand. They make an approach during a council meeting, explain the project, tell why it's a good thing all around for the residents, for the town, for the developer, and then we make a decision. But this case was a little bit different. So immediately I got my suspicions up because it was so out of the ordinary for the developer to want to meet with me. especially me, because I was the maverick. I was the one that, it didn't matter how I voted. It always passed 5-2 or 6-1. So my vote was irrelevant. When we got to the meeting, it was at the developer's office. And when we got there, he showed me all the beautiful plans they had, with all the greenery and green trees drawn in. And, they make them look so beautiful on paper. And then he said, and all the neighbors support it. Well, I knew that was a little odd because I had gotten probably about 25 phone calls from neighbors saying they opposed it. And I told them that. And he says, well, we convinced them. We made some concessions and they're all supportive now. I said, okay. I got home and I made a couple of phone calls to these people who had called me, and they weren't supportive. I only called 2 or 3 of them just to get a flavor of things, but they weren't in support. So now I was definitely suspicious and I was distrustful of the developer. So that went on for a little while longer. He met with all of the councilmen individually in his office. I think he met with them by council district. The council president accompanied each of the 2 district councilmen at 3 different meetings. We have 3 council districts. So I guess all the other councilmen were convinced and they were going to support it, but I wasn't. I told them that it was going to make a bad traffic situation on Middle Spring Avenue worse. It was across the street from the high school, so you had buses coming out of there constantly, and that was going to impede traffic. And all the other reasons. The neighbors were opposed to it aesthetically. They were opposed to it because it would reduce their property value. And that land had just been rezoned from industrial to residential about a year earlier at the insistence of the neighbors. And now they wanted to go back to commercial, high-level commercial. So it didn't make a lot of sense. Well, I found out the reason why on short order. I came home after one meeting where we were discussing a separate proposal. It was the Lowe's project at the corner of Middle Spring and Douglas Avenue, also in my council district. And we had spent a lot of time on this project with the neighbors, meeting with the neighborhood, the developers, and the council people, all in large groups, open public meetings, advertised. And the neighbors had agreed, after the developer made a lot of concessions, they agreed to support the project, or at least not oppose the project. One of those concessions, and the biggest concession, was on a side street right off Middle Spring Avenue called Rockwell Street. Rockwell Street was going to abut the Lowe's development. Lowe's agreed to buy all of the properties on the east side of the street and use all of that land that those houses were on as a buffer zone. They were going to plant large trees throughout the land, including along the property line. They would put 6-foot or higher arborvitae. They were going to put up a 6-foot stockade fence behind the arborvitae. So when neighbors looked out of their windows, all they would see was this beautiful green park with high trees. They wouldn't see the roof of the building that was on the property next to it. So they all agreed, and I agreed that I would watch the aesthetics of their neighborhood and be sure to watch out for the property values that they had, that those weren't destroyed in this whole project. And they trusted me to do that. We get to one council meeting, and the guy from Lowe's gets up and says, "We need an easement on Rockwell Street." So I said, "Why do you need an easement?" He said, "Well, we're going to build a high retaining wall. If you go by Lowe's now, you'd see it. High retaining wall, it's about 20 feet. And in order to hold that retaining wall up, we have to put," he had a name for the, a term for it. In layman's terms, they call them dead men, where when you're building a wall out of railroad ties, you put one perpendicular that goes down, and the weight of this property, of the street, holds that down. And you put several of those, and it keeps the wall in place, so the wall doesn't just tip with the weight of the dirt. I forget the technical term, but I said, why do you need to get an easement to do that on the street when you just bought all of the properties that were at least 50 feet in depth off the street and maybe 100 feet in a lot of cases? And he said, oh, we moved the wall closer to the street. I said, what do you mean you moved the wall? And I started to question him, and he started to backtrack. Oh, we didn't move the wall. I'm just new. I'm filling in for somebody who's sick, so I don't have all the details of the project. So I said, well, I'd like to postpone the discussion until either you have all the details or the other guy comes back. The council president wouldn't hear of it. He kept gaveling me out of order, saying we have to vote on this tonight, or Lowe's is going to walk away from the project, and we need the tax base. Said Lowe's isn't going to walk. They got $1 million already invested. If we postpone this for a week, they're not going anywhere. But he gavelled me out of order, and they passed it on a 6-1 vote. So I was livid, and I came home and I was, ranting and raving to my wife about how out of control this is. And I promised the residents I would have their back, and they're going to think I betrayed them. I betrayed the trust, and I just can't do this anymore. And my wife said, maybe it's time to go to the FBI if you really think that these guys are getting paid off. Let them look into it. So we thought about it overnight and thought about the consequences of doing that. I thought it's possible I could lose my job. I was Deputy Secretary of State. These councilmen were fairly powerful people, not just in town, but in the state. And, I don't think that'd be appreciated. I'm an Italian American. Italian Americans frown on being a rat. And doing that kind of thing is probably antithetical to every aspect of the traditional Italian thought process. It was certainly against every instinct in my body to do something like that. We talked about how if I lost my job, we might have to move out of state because I'm not sure I could get another job in state. And how we'd lose a lot of friends that we've had for a long time because they wouldn't like what I did and they just wouldn't bother with me anymore. But at the end of it, my wife said, if you don't go to the FBI because you're afraid that you might lose your job or that you might lose some friends, is that any better than what they're doing? They're taking bribes to enhance their lifestyle. You'd be looking the other way to maintain yours. And boy, when she put it that way, it was pretty clear I had no choice. So she had a contact in the FBI. My wife is an administrator at the Roger Williams Law School. And she had a contact that went through the school that was in the FBI in Boston. And she contacted her the next day. And that person put me in touch with the local agent in the Rhode Island field office. And he got back to me right away, set up a meeting with me. And my wife came to that first meeting, and I got to tell you, if he hadn't, not sure I could have made it because my knees were knocking as I walked through the door. It was we met at the Paneras in Cranston on Reservoir Avenue. It has since moved. But it was so frightening to walk into that room knowing that I was going to sit down with an FBI agent and I was going to tell him that I thought some of my friends on the council were taking bribes. But I had to do it, and I went through with it. And he said to me, the information sounds good. Let me run it, by my superiors, and I'll get back to you tomorrow, which he did. And he said that his superiors gave the okay for them to investigate, but they would need me to help. And I said, well, what do you mean? What do you want me to do? And he said, well, we're going to need you to wear a wire. And I said, no. There's got to be another way you can do it. Get a wiretap for their phones, to follow them around, do what FBI does. Don't get me involved in that. I'm not an agent. And he said, if you want to stop what's going on, this is going to be the only way to do it. We need that kind of concrete evidence. So I thought about it for just one day, and I got back to him and said, okay, I'm in. What do I have to do? Turns out that I was going on the council conference, which was held in Orlando, Florida that year. It's the Rhode Island League of Cities, it's the National League of Cities and Towns Conference. And the councilmen in North Providence are all members of the Rhode Island League. So we attended that conference frequently, at least every year. And this year was being held in Florida, and I wasn't going to go because I didn't want to be around these guys at this point. And my wife convinced me that I should go because I should, just try to be friends with them and see if they'll confide in me. Well, it turns out that they didn't do that. They didn't confide in me. But they went out for drinks one day. We went to dinner at a P.F. Chang's, and after dinner, they went out for drinks. My wife and I weren't invited. So we went back my wife came on that trip with me. I insisted. We went back to the hotel. While they were having drinks, one of the councilmen put his arm around the other two and said, "Do you think that the Stop and Shop proposal will be approved in December? I was really counting on that money for Christmas." This was overheard by someone else who told me about it. Well, that was the evidence I needed. It wasn't evidence that would satisfy the FBI, but now I was convinced that I was right all along. So the FBI needed me to wear the wire, get more evidence. So I had to insert myself into the conspiracy. So I called up one of the councilmen and I said, I knew he had been drinking. It was the councilman that made the remark at the conference. And I knew that he might not remember if I was there when he said it or not. So I told him that I overheard what he said and I wanted to be part of it. And, why can't you count me in? I'd be your fourth vote, because I knew it was the other three now. I'll be your fourth vote. It only takes 4 votes to pass anything. So you don't have to convince anybody going forward. We have the 4 votes, but you have to cut me in. It took some time, took about 2 months, but they agreed to cut me in. And I got my first payoff after the February meeting where the Stop and Shop project was approved. And it was $4,000. My cut was $4,000. And the whole transaction was recorded on videotape, him giving me the money, and then getting in the car and proceeding to tell me the whole story from start to finish, how this happened. He implicated everybody in that discussion. Middlemen, developers, council people, former town solicitor. He just implicated everybody. There was a second project that was the same thing. We got paid. I was part of it, and he implicated everybody again. It was right after the second payoff. In fact, it was after the first installment of the second payoff. We were going to get paid in 2 installments. That the FBI made the arrest. I wasn't in Rhode Island when they did. I went to Indiana to help a friend who was running for Congress. And right after that, I flew to Baltimore to join my wife, who was at a conference for her place of employment. And it was while I was in Baltimore that I got a call at about 6 o'clock in the morning from the FBI agent saying, "We just made 3 arrests. There's more coming." But we had to do it they couldn't get a grand jury. It was too late to get a grand jury impaneled. So they had to use what they call an information. It's kind of a written summary of all the events, and it goes to a judge. And the judge said, yeah, there's enough evidence here to warrant the arrest. And based on that information, they are picked up. But he said it's pretty clear in the information that you're going to be the informant. I was supposed to be protected from that, at least initially, at least until we went to court. But it was clear right from that, by process of elimination. There was only 5 councilmen at the Florida conference. 3 of them were arrested. I was the other one. And the 4th one is the one that overheard the conversation. So by process of elimination, I was the informant. So the phone started ringing that day. The FBI said, don't talk to anybody. If you get calls from reporters, just say no comment, no comment, no comment.
What a terrible thing to do. I'm a journalist.
I know.
You're supposed to talk to reporters.
That's what makes your job so difficult. But he said if I say anything in the press, that my job on the witness stand is going to be that much more difficult, because everything I say could be used by the defense attorneys to try to make it look like I was lying or I had an ulterior motive. I wanted press for my next election or whatever. So I didn't talk to anybody. I got a lot of phone calls, even from national, USA Today. I got calls from the AP. I got calls from Fox News. But it was just no comment throughout. And it played out in the press anyway. They just assumed I was the informant instead of being able to say with definition that I was. But that went on. The arrest, I started wearing a wire in 2009, January of 2009. The arrest happened in May of 2011. So I wore a wire, 2010, I mean. So I wore a wire for 17 months.
Wow.
And I got to tell you, that's very intrusive, because I couldn't tell anybody what I was doing. One night I was out to dinner with my wife and two other couples, and we ordered our food, and I get a phone call from one of the councilmen. Every time I got a phone call, I had to, go somewhere private, call the FBI, tell them I just got a phone call from one of the council people that went into my voicemail, and they want me to call them back. I'd listen to the voicemail first. And he would instruct me to turn on the recording device. Every time I turned the recording device on, I had to post a preamble. This is Paul Caranci. It's Thursday, December 10th. It's 5:00. And I just got a phone call from the councilman, wants me to call him back. I'm going to do that now. And then I would make the phone call. I had to dial my phone or press the buttons while the recorder was running so they could listen to what number I was calling based on the sound to make sure I wasn't calling a fake number, And then sometimes that call would go into his voicemail. I have to hang up, I'd leave a message, hang up, call the FBI back. He would tell me maybe leave it running for 5 or 10 minutes, see if he calls you back. If he doesn't, then turn it off. When I turned it off, I'd have to do a postamble. And that was, same thing, Paul Caranci, the date, the time, why I was turning the device off. And then I would have to start over again when he called me back. So sometimes one phone call could involve an hour's worth of work. And it may just be because he wanted to say, hey, did you see the basketball game last night? So there was nothing there, but I had to go through all the motions anyway. Every conversation with the three councilmen had to be recorded.
So, Paul, let me ask you this. So I want people to read the book. It's called Wired.
Wired,
a shocking true story of political corruption, which is the story that you're telling.
Yes.
And that you wrote that in 2017?
Yes.
So a couple of quick questions, and then we want people to pick up the book. Yeah, this is fascinating, frankly, and for me, incredibly fascinating. Since when I first got to the Providence Journal, I worked in the Greenville office, and we covered North Providence, and then I went back to the Greenville office to manage it for a while. So I have a history of that area of the state, and probably two of the most fascinating towns in North Providence and Johnston. In Rhode Island. People arrested were convicted and jailed.
Yeah, there were 11 indictments, 10 convictions, and five of them got jail time, and 4 of those sentences were record sentences for white-collar crime in Rhode Island.
Ramifications in terms of you after this was all said and done. Did you get threats? Did you hear from people? What happened since then?
I had 5 pretty nasty letters, I think mostly from the same person. I had one threat, and my sister got one death threat on the phone. I had my cars vandalized several times. I constantly was getting flat tires because people would drive by and throw nails where I parked my cars. I had my house vandalized twice, the outside of my house. I had to buy an alarm system, cameras, and surveillance equipment that cost me over $1,000. My pay at the Secretary of State's office was cut $35,000. I lost my state house office.
Your pay was cut 35,000.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
There was a reorganization in the office, and my position was, the salary was decreased by 35,000, but that was the only position affected by the reorganization.
Who was Secretary of State?
A good friend of mine, Ralph Marlis, was Secretary of State, and he had, I have to say this, Ralph is an upstanding guy, and even though I had to pay a price for what I did, I don't hold it against him or blame him at all. He was doing what he had to do. In fact, what I did nearly
Well,
cost him the election.
I'm going to play reporter here. He was doing what he had to do. Why did he have to do it, and who was telling him to do it?
Well, a couple of reasons he had to do it. Through this whole process, he was running for re-election as Secretary of State. He started running for re-election in July when you file the papers, and the arrest happened in May. So his race was impacted because his opponent was Senator Raptakis, was saying that I was dirty in this process, that I was taking bribes, but I cut a deal by turning these other guys in so I wouldn't get as severe a sentence. And Ralph was keeping me on a payroll at this extraordinary salary. I was making at the time $135,000 as deputy secretary. $125,000, I'm sorry. And he was keeping me on the payroll because he was just as dirty. And if you recall, he only won that election by 1%, 1 percentage point. And it was largely because of this. And I couldn't come out and say it's not true because I was under an order by the FBI not to speak about it until after the trials. So I couldn't even deny it. I just had to let him hang. And he hung. And he almost lost. And then a couple of years later, he lost his lieutenant governor race. And this might have been a contributing factor in that as well. Ralph was an outstanding Secretary of State. And to lose him in government because of this wasn't fair to him. So his base is in North Providence. In fact, one of the people that went to jail, his family, Ralph's family, and that councilman's family was so close that when Ralph Marlis's father was in the hospital dying, this councilman's father was there holding his hand. I mean, this is a family that was very close. And if you can imagine the father of the councilman calling up Ralph saying, "What are you doing? This guy's putting my kid in jail and you're supporting them." There was no evidence at that time publicly that I was right and they were wrong because no trials had occurred yet. So Ralph was under a lot of pressure and he had to do something. And I don't hold what he did to me against me at all. And, you know, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can do the right thing, but there's a price to pay for doing the right thing. This is a world we live in.
Yeah, often that happens.
Well,
Paul,
often.
tell us quickly about, you've written a number of other books. Are all of those about political intrigue?
No.
Or are they more historical in nature?
I wrote the 2 History Press books, John Gordon and the North Providence book. I wrote 2 how-to books. One is how to run for local office, something I knew a little bit about. And the other was a book for realtors, for real estate agents, because I was a realtor for about 30 years, still am. Then I wrote the 2 books about public corruption, Scoundrels, which defines public corruption, and Wired. There was supposed to be one book noticed the covers look very similar. There was supposed to be one big book, but it was so thick that the publisher said, no one's going to read that. You need to break it up into 2 books. So I did. Together, that would have been about 600 pages. So I split them up into 400 and 200, just under 400. And no, I'm sorry, 450 is Wired and 250 is Scoundrels. So it's a part 1 and part 2, if you will. And then I wrote 3 religious books. In 2017, after I finished Wired, I wanted to just do something completely different, get away from the corruption and politics. So I decided to write a book about Our Lady of Fatima. It was the 100th anniversary of her apparition at Fatima. So I wrote this book, and that book sold so well that the following year, I did a similar book, and this is about the apparitions of Our Lady of Lourdes. And then that one sold so well that the next year I did a 3rd part. This is Heavenly Portrait. It's about the apparitions of Our Lady of Guadalupe in the 1500s to Juan Diego. All of them are fascinating. They appeal mostly to Catholics, of which I'm one, but they're all fascinating. And that's what led me to write my latest book. I think I have around here some. Oh, I do want to mention this one. This is Monumental Providence, Legends of History and Sculpture, Statuary, Monuments, and Memorials. And this is a book that describes the history of every monument, public art, in the city of Providence.
An interesting subject these days.
It is, because a lot of it's coming down. The reason this one I love so much is because I wrote it with my daughter. And it gave us an opportunity to really do something interesting together. So I treasure that book. This is my newest book, Before the End of the Age, Signs of the Coming Chastisement. And it's all about the signs that are all around us today, the natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, the plagues, the locusts in Africa that are destroying crops, the mosquitoes in Louisiana, the murder hornets in California that came from overseas. All of those are signs of the 3 days of darkness that was predicted by several of the prophets, starting in the biblical times and going right up to the year 2020. It's fascinating. In between that, I wrote Terror in Wichita. This is a true crime story. If you can see that.
Sure. We got it.
See, right there. Those are the dead bodies of the victims lying in the snow. I got a call. I sold the rights to 3 of my books to a Hollywood producer, Red Varden Studios, Sig Gothier in California. He bought the rights to Lourdes, the Guadalupe book, and the John Gordon book. And he called me up and he said, "Have you ever heard of the Wichita Hare?" I said, "No." And he told me the story. And he said, "I need someone to write about it because I need to buy the rights. I know this story will sell in Hollywood. I just have to own the exclusive rights to it before I can move it." So I wrote that book, and he bought the rights to it, and he's now trying. Because this book came out in February, and right after it came out, Hollywood shut down. So I don't think there's been any progress made yet. But that's a fascinating story about 2 brothers in Wichita, Kansas in the year 2000 that went on a spree. They originally intended to hijack cars, expensive looking cars, force the driver to go to an ATM, take out their money, and they were going to just rob them. But the second victim resisted, and they ended up shooting her, and she died a few weeks later. And then they went to the wrong house and got 5 other victims, and over a period of 5 hours, raped and tortured them, made them go to the ATMs, withdrew all their money, only a few $1,000s. These were young kids. And eventually took them to an abandoned soccer field that was under construction and shot them execution style. But one of the girls, now they were naked, they had been raped repeatedly for 3 hours, and it was 17 degrees and a fresh coat of snow on the ground. completely naked, kneeling in front of the car, shot in the head execution style. One girl, the bullet went off a hair clip and didn't penetrate her head. She, after the two brothers left, she got up and ran toward a house that had its Christmas lights on. This happened in the second week of December in 2000. And she figured because the Christmas lights were still on, they might actually be awake. It was 2 a.m. And she ran to the house, but to get there, it was 1.2 miles away. She had to climb 2 fences that separated the field from a highway. On top of the fences was barbed wire. And she had to scale those up one side, down the other, 2 different fences, one on each side of the highway, and then run to the house in the freezing cold, naked, bleeding from everywhere. And when she got to the house, she passed out. But when she came to, she had enough presence of mind to give the police a description of the brothers so accurate, what they were wearing, what they looked like, and what they were driving, that one brother was arrested 2 hours later and the other brother 4 hours later. And then it goes through the trial, and just an amazing set of circumstances in the trial.
And Paul, when did that book come out?
This came out in February of this year.
So
this book was December this month. In fact, I don't even have my copies yet. This is a press copy.
Hey, Frank.
yes,
I'm just going to jump out. I have to run to a meeting, but I'll let you guys talk. And whenever you're done, I'll close up shop.
all right. Nice of you to stop by.
I got to run to a city council meeting.
Okay,
Thank you,
I'll give
Ryan.
my best. Yeah, Paul, it's clear that I think the truth is, or nonfiction, often stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
What's next for you? What happens next?
I don't know. I'm taking a little break from writing. I usually do after I finish a book, just for a couple of months. I regroup, and I think my parish, St. Augustine Parish in Providence, has this saintly nun. Sister Dot is her name, and she's just an extraordinary woman who is an absolute saint, living saint. And I thought I would write a small book about her. So I might be doing that next, if she's okay with that. And if not, I don't know.
It seems to me that the environment in Rhode Island is really good for authors. Do you find that? Are you talking with and dealing with other writers as well?
I do, yeah. I'm a part of the Association of Rhode Island Authors. We're about, right now, about 280 authors strong. And we meet monthly. Of course, we meet by Zoom these days. But we exchange ideas. We talk about, different projects and different ways to approach writing, different ways to market your books afterwards. We actually sponsor several marketing events. The big one is the Rhode Island Author Expo, which was just held last Saturday, December 5th, virtually.
Paul, we've been on a long time, and I don't want to keep you much longer than this. One last question, and I want to go back to the things that went on in North Providence.
Yep.
Are you still getting any kind of harassment or anything from people, or is that all done now?
About 3 or 4 months ago, my wife and I were walking in Centerdale, just crossing that bridge where the powder mill used to be. The one Asquatucket River runs along the border of Johnston and North Providence. So right at that bridge, we were there, and a car came by and stopped. And the guy said to me, there's a lot of rats in that water. You better watch out. And when he first said it, I thought he was talking about river rats. But then quickly became obvious what he meant. And my wife recognized him as the cousin of one of the councilmen that was jailed. So the feelings are still out there. My house hasn't been vandalized, or my cars recently, but those intense feelings are still there.
Is your feeling, your impression that what happened in North Providence was something that was just indicative to that, and that wasn't widespread in Rhode Island, or is this the way we do business in Rhode Island?
This is the way we do business in Rhode Island. I think when Arlene Violet was Attorney General, she made that comment that this is how it's done here. I received an award from the National Association of Secretaries of State. It's called the Margaret Chase Smith Award for Political Courage. Margaret Chase Smith American Democracy Award for Political Courage. I received that award in 2015. And I don't belong with the list of recipients of that award. Jimmy Carter, Desmond Tutu, who else? Oh my God. Margaret Chase Smith was one. Condoleezza Rice, just an amazing group of people. And then there's me. I don't fit in. But in any case, the FBI agent who heads up white collar crime in all of United States came to that presentation and spoke before I received the award. And he said he was in charge of white collar crime in New York City. And he prosecuted mafioso routinely. And he said it's easier to get a mafia don in New York who took the oath of omerta to talk than it is to get somebody from Rhode Island to talk. He said the culture here, it's not that Rhode Island is more corrupt than other states in the Union. It's that the people of Rhode Island are more willing to accept that corruption in the course of their daily business. And that's why it flourishes here.
What an interesting observation that is.
Yeah.
I think that pretty fascinating. Paul, I want to thank you a lot for today. I think a fascinating story, and I think books to be read. I urge people. This is the Christmas season, Hanukkah season, Kwanzaa season. Get a book that's interesting, and read about some nonfiction stuff. I often find we have nonfiction is often so much more interesting than fiction, and it's amazing what goes on. But I want to not only thank you there, but also thank you for what you did. It's we don't have enough people who come forward and who do that and put their own well-being on the line in order to try and fight some of the corruption that's going on. And frankly, I think one of my great fears as we see stuff going on today is that we're losing a grip on what is important in society and the importance of our form of government, and it's based upon honesty and transparency. But hopefully we come out of it all well. And but again, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Part of our author series. This is a fascinating series. We have some fascinating writers in Rhode Island, be it fiction or nonfiction. We will have, I know coming up will be Corey Dean. I don't know, you know Corey?
I don't know Corey.
Corey is a former journal reporter, former colleague of mine. She went on to the New York Times, where she was, I believe, she became assistant bureau chief of their Washington bureau, and then she was the science editor on the Times. It's written a number of books, science books, but taken from the perspective of people like you and I understanding science. So not so technical, and also incredible subject, but lots more coming up.
Terrific.
Well, thank you, Paul.
And thank you so much for your comment too. It's very kind of you to say that.
Well, I spent a lot of years playing reporter, and a lot of years of writing stories that were not as involved, but certainly we covered some of those things, and hearing stories that we could not prove what was going on. And I want to underscore this also. I came up here from New Jersey, where I started as a sports writer and in news for a little bit, not very long. I think you're right. I don't think Rhode Island is any more corrupt than any other state. I think what we do here, how we operate here, is how they do it in New Jersey, how they do it in Louisiana, how they do it in New Mexico. Yeah. But perhaps there are people, you're right, perhaps there are people who are just more willing to accept it. But I'm not even sure if that's so, because I think there are certain parts of New Jersey. When I was a reporter, I'm sorry, I'm going off and
it's all right.
But when I was when I was in at the Perth Amber Evening News, and then we moved to Woodbridge, it was at the time of when the mafia was really incredibly visible in New Jersey. It was a time of Sam the plumber, Sam D. Cavalcante, all of those families, all those people who were around, and it was all around us. I mean, I remember there was one guy who had been in jail. They let him out. They were certain that he was involved in some homicides, and he ran a construction company. And every time his guys would drive from the construction company, they would get speeding tickets, even though they were going maybe 20 miles an hour. So we would follow him home. We would follow people home, and we would get tickets as well. So, I mean, all those things, it is. Yeah. It is unfortunately a part of our society, and I get a sense in today's world that people are there. There is an element within our society. I don't care whether it's North Dakota or Northern Massachusetts or Southern Rhode Island, that are willing to accept falsehoods as fact just because someone says it, and I'm troubled by that and the consequences of that in long term in this country.
And it's so much easier in a state like Rhode Island where everyone knows each other. I mean, you'd think it was possible that somebody in Chicago may have had a relationship with Mayor Daley, like Rhode Islanders had with Buddy Cianci. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. Yeah. But he was everybody's friend, and when he does something that isn't legal, so many people are willing to look the other way because they're friends.
Well, I can remember. I remember Buddy well. I was also, after my journal days, I was editor of the Business News for 15 years. 10 years, I guess it was. And that's during Buddy's heyday in Providence. I actually, at the Journal, I covered him when he announced for mayor for the first time, and then at the Business News, covered him during his time as mayor. And we would print our this time of year our top 10 people to watch. Buddy was on top of the list. I was at Mediterraneo with somebody, and that was Buddy's favorite restaurant. Okay. And walking past Buddy's table, and he looked up at me and he said, "I know why you put me on that list. You think I'm going to be indicted?" And so it was. Anyway, Paul, thank you. I look forward to reading your books, and I think it's terrific that you've done what you did, and I just wish you and your family a wonderful holiday season. And
you as well, Fred.
Thank you so much. All right, and Ryan will figure it out for me. I'm going to shut myself down here, and I am going to leave the studio.
Healthcare workers